Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. If I don't know you, my name is Father Brendan Fitzgerald. I'm the associate pastor here at Sacred Heart, and we're so honored tonight to welcome Coach Bob Mahr to the parish. Once again, we see him every Sunday, but it's great to have him with us tonight to share some words of wisdom, lessons, I'm sure, well learned over the course of his years about faith, about spiritual life, about coaching, about all of the good things. And so we're honored to have him here this evening. And without any further ado, Coach Mahr.
Thank you, Father. Thank you all for coming and spending about 45 minutes to an hour of your evening here. I want to thank Father Brennan and Sacred Heart for sort of coordinating this event. So my being here is really, it's kind of been a series of callings. You know, what started as writing a graduation gift for my oldest daughter graduating from high school, life lessons from Dad, which imparted the wisdom and things I had picked up along the way. My wife reminded me that I had 2 more daughters, so it took 2 more iterations to make the book deeper, more meaningful. Then I had a sister-in-law say, hey, could you do some for my sons, which would be my 2 nephews? And then I had a friend of the family ask me to write one for their son. So in putting all this together, sort of the dad references became Uncle Bob references, which just became generic references. And I said, geez, man, I think I have a book here. And Christian Faith Publishing agreed, so it's what's for sale out there. But the book was sort of the catalyst to take me to the next level. And I started blogging after the book. I've been blogging for 4 years. It's about 160 blogs that are out there. And that calling led me to being here tonight, is to hearing the kind of the urge, or feeling the urge to start sharing some of these information that we have in blogs. But I put the blogs with you guys in speeches. So that's what I'm here tonight. The Coach Mahr, God wired me to be a coach. It's my passion, but it's never been my profession. I've coached now as a volunteer coach for 35 years, roughly 70 teams. I counted it up. It was almost 1,000 players that I've touched. And it's ranged from rec league, indoor soccer, to AAU basketball, to college football for 2 years, and high school football for 10 years up at Westminster. And as I was doing all that, I came to the realization that I think it's 1.5% of the kids who play youth sports end up playing that sport in college. But 100% of them end up being citizens in society. And when I realized that, I said, my focus has to change. It's not really on what happens on the field or what happens on the court, but there's life lessons that I got to start teaching. And as I started to teach that and gain more of an appreciation, I did some character coaching. That concept of coach, if those of you guys aren't familiar, coach was a word that kind of came about in the 19th century. So university students referred to their instructors as coaches because they were kind of conveying them along the way through their lessons. And it went from the academic world to the athletic world, where a coach is somebody that takes someone of importance from where they are to where they need to be. Think about it. A horse-drawn carriage shows up. It's taken somebody of importance from where they are to where they want to be. And that's really the symbolism of a coach, and it's what I've rallied myself around. But the one thing is, coaching does not necessarily improve a player's performance. I'll give insights, I'll set sort of environment for learning, but it's really the player that has to choose. And tonight, I'll share some things with you that you can choose to use or choose not to, and that will make the difference. There's an expression, it's the paint in the can has to be applied. So I'll provide some paint in the can, hopefully some different colors, hopefully some things that have some value to it, but it's up to you to apply it, to make the step to go forward. And I feel fortunate that that paint that's in the can are lessons that I've discovered and lessons that I've learned through my experiences of business, coaching, raising a family, faith, being in the community, engaged in the community. All of that is kind of intertwined and has led me to where I think I have insights that could help you from where you are to where you need to be. And I trust that those insights will have value. But before I kind of get into my talk tonight, which is going to be on presence, 2 principles, and I just touched on one right there, trust. So I use the word trust and not hope, because to me, hope's a little soft. Trust is a little bit more firm. There was a book published, Hope is Not a Strategy, 2001, a business book. And I kind of read that, and a couple years after that, I was having a business plan meeting with my boss, who was one of the owners of the company, and he literally said to me, let's hope the sales force acts upon our initiatives. And I was like, wait a second. My success is dependent upon hoping others do something. And I started to think, no, it's not wrong. That word hope, it's trust. It's having belief that it's going to happen. Do you hope that you get a raise? Do you hope that you get a new job that you're applying for? A better example is if you lend me $100, do you hope that I give it back to you? Or do you trust that I'm going to give it back to you? Trust is a much more significant, it carries the belief. Now, I get into debates with my daughters all the time because they'll say the word hope, and they'll realize they should have said trust, or hope is is fine. Having hope, being hopeful. It's that hoping something happens that we need to move beyond. And that second principle, that if my daughters were here tonight, they would cringe, is if you said the word try. I am a true believer in do or do not, there is no try. Yoda said it in Star Wars, it's a line from a movie. But if you think about it, try, when you say you're going to try to do something, you've already at the onset said, it might not happen, and I'm okay with that. It's really, are you going to do it or are you not going to do it? When I coached high school football, I would have players say, Coach, I'm trying to make the tackle. Or, Coach, I'm trying to make that block. Well, quite frankly, coaches play kids that do make that tackle or do make that block. And in my first job as a salesperson, I had this crusty old sales manager. Charlie was his name. And we would have our Monday morning sales meetings back when that happened. And you brought everybody into a building and you talked about things. And there was a colleague of mine, a little bit older, had been with the company a little bit longer. And in these Monday morning meetings, he kept saying, well, I'm trying to get an appointment with this gentleman. I'm trying to see if I could do a demo. I'm trying to find out who owns the budget. And it was week after week of him saying the word trying till Charlie snapped. Charlie said, I don't pay you to try. I pay you to deliver results. So it's do or do not. Try is not the answer. And there's nothing wrong with the do not piece. And that's where people sometimes want to go to try, because it kind of softens that failure of, well, I didn't do it. But when you don't do it, it's an opportunity to grow. So if you're not making tackles, well, stay after. Work on your technique. If you're not making the appropriate sales, well, get some mentoring. Take a class. In some cases, in the football world, maybe you should be playing soccer or on the debate team. And in the sales world, maybe you should be doing product management or finance, and it's just not cut out for you. Doors will open when other doors close. But if you just, hey, I'm trying, you're never going to get to that point. So what I'm going to talk about tonight is presence. Presence to me, I choose one word every year to rally around. I don't do the New Year's resolutions because by January 12th or January 20th, I've forgotten about them. And they're up on the shelf. So I started this about a decade ago. I pick a word for the year, and be integrity, be disciplined. Last year, 2020, my word was rejoice. I really wanted to be joyful. And I picked that word between Christmas and New Year's at the start of 2020. It was a challenging year to be joyful and rejoice. But having that word gave me the opportunity to continue to look for ways to find joy, to look for ways to be joyful. So as 2021 was about to start, I was reflecting and determining what my word would be. So I chose presence. And I chose it, one, because of the pandemic of 2020, where there was the fog, the rat race, it was get up. It just seemed like Groundhog Day, day after day after day. And I was looking for a way to kind of elevate myself and get above that fog. And if you're present and you're intentional with what's going on, it's a way to do that. It's also a way to ward off distractions. 2020, when you think about the distractions, there's always a lot of distractions in our lives. We're always challenged, things are happening. But 2020 seemed to have an abundance of distractions. So if you're present in a way that those distractions don't penetrate. You can kind of ward them off. And you're also present to what is going on around you. Think about 2020. A lot of things were happening in the world. There was civil unrest. There was, a bunch of things in the news that were causing you to think about what was going on. And if you had presence and intentionality, you looked at it differently. You just didn't shut it out. And maybe you had the opportunity to learn some more because you were open and present. So one thing, presence, not to be confused with charisma. And some people will do that. Now, charismatic people do have presence, but presence is not on an equivalence of charisma. Charismatic people, think about it through centuries. Charismatic people can often have negative results. It's a skill. It's a talent that people develop, and they use it quite possibly for ill gains. So although charismatic people have presence and charisma are two different things. And I'm talking about presence here, and I'm going to get into what it means to me. But if we look at the venue, I will not be talking about the presence, God's presence in our lives or Christ's presence in our lives. That's a different talk for a different evening. And I'm also not going to talk about the presence of Jesus in the Eucharist. Even though the Archdiocese, this is the year of the Eucharist, again, that's a different talk for a different evening, and quite frankly, with a different speaker who's got a little bit more theology training in him than I do. But I will share some insights as to how Jesus mirrors presence and gives us the opportunity to learn from his modeling. So what is presence? Well, to me, presence has 4 components. Right? Practice mindfulness or intentionality. Understand being versus doing. Cherishing the journey, and having an attitude of privilege. So let's talk about mindfulness. Having mindfulness or intentionality. It's defined as paying attention with presence while having an attitude of openness, kindness, and curiosity. So think about how I chose presence because of wanting to be open and receptive to what was going on. There's the noise. If you're present and you're mindful, you understand where the noise is coming from. Maybe you evaluate the sources of the noise that you have in your life. And you can rise yourself above sort of that mental clutter. And there's a proven link between being mindful and divergent thinking. So much so that companies like Procter & Gamble, IBM, Google have enrolled their employees in mindfulness training because that divergent thinking piece leads to innovation, leads to creativity. So being mindful in our lives leads to openness, to see things, to be receptive. And there's a great quote from Frank Otlaw. Watch your thoughts, they become words. Watch your words, they become actions. Watch your actions, they become habits. Watch your habits, they become character. Watch your character, it becomes your destiny. Thoughts directly linked to destiny. So if you're open, you're mindful, those thoughts that are receptive will lead to a destiny that's got tremendous potential, different directions you go to. If you're closed-minded, those thoughts kind of leave you down a very narrow path. And I've got an analogy that when you're trying to be mindful and intentionality. So, question for you, when you squeeze a tube of toothpaste, what comes out? It's not a complicated answer. Toothpaste. Right? So why does toothpaste come out when you squeeze? Well, there's 2 reasons. 1, you've put pressure on the tube by squeezing it. And 2, toothpaste was what was put in the first place. Right? Applesauce doesn't come out. So, how does that fit in our world? Well, when we get squeezed, when life is putting pressure on us, what's going to come out? What we put in. When I did the football talk, I used to talk to kids. There was, it's 4th and goal, 30 seconds left, up by 4, Friday night under the lights, right? There's a lot of pressure right there in that situation if you're the inside linebacker out there on the field. Now, if you've put in the right stuff before that moment, you worked hard all off season, you improved your strength, you studied the film and you knew that their best play was coming right at you so you could anticipate it. You worked hard in week all practice working on your technique. Well, good stuff's going to come out when you get squeezed. If you haven't, not going to be as successful. In the real world, we're all faced with situations where we're squeezed. In the business world, you may have a situation where a boss asks you to do something that's unethical. It's not consistent with what your beliefs are. What's going to come out at that time? Whatever you've put in. And if you haven't put anything in, well, the world has. The world has put in through social media, through what you read in the paper, what you see. If you're not intentional, it gets filled with stuff that isn't necessarily what you want. And when you get squeezed, what comes out isn't necessarily what you truly believe or what you truly are. And leadership is intentional influence, that mindfulness piece, that being intentional. When I think about being a leader and as a coach, trying maybe to mentor or guide people, intentional influence, it's deliberate and it's purposeful ability to affect change and make a difference. Right? So when you think about the civil rights movement, two individuals, Martin Luther King. There's no doubt about it, Martin Luther King was a leader. Martin Luther King had leadership. He intentionally influenced. He affected change. No doubt about it. Very few of us will ever be Martin Luther King or even come close to Martin Luther King's abilities. But there was also Rosa Parks. So Rosa Parks had an opportunity where she was squeezed on a bus, and what came out? What she put in the first place, her values, her ethics, what she believed in. And she led in the moment. Martin Luther King led a movement. Rosa Parks led in the moment. We are all capable of being Rosa Parks if we've got the right stuff in our tube of toothpaste. And both of those are just as critical of movement and leading in the moment. So that's step one in terms of presence. Practice mindfulness and intentionality. Step two, understanding being versus doing. So the world likes to define us by what we've accomplished. Who we are gets defined by what we do. When quite frankly, who we are should drive what we do. It should be the opposite. And there's a great example of two people on both ends of that spectrum. And I apologize for those of you that aren't sports fanatics. I haven't been a football coach. I use a lot of sports. In this particular case, you got Sugar Ray Leonard. Let me read a quote. Sugar Ray Leonard, if you're not familiar with him, one of the greatest boxers of all time, the greatest boxer probably of the 80s and the 90s. Right? His quote, "Nothing could satisfy me outside the ring. Nothing in life that compare to becoming a world champion, having your hand raised in that moment of glory with thousands, millions of people cheering you on." Right? If you know Sugar Ray Leonard's story, he had a hard time retiring. He retired, he came back. He retired, he came back. When he finally had to walk away from the ring, he suffered depression, had problems, because his identity was so much wrapped up into what he did and not who he was. He struggled. On the other end of the spectrum, Chuck Noll, four-time Super Bowl winning coach, he purposefully never allowed himself to be defined by his accomplishments. He even publicly stated that his value as a person was never based on whether the Steelers were winning or losing. When it came time to walk away from the game, no problems, because his identity wasn't tied to it. And he lived a prosperous life afterwards because he had value in who he was in his being. And we perpetuate this issue as a society. We've got a situation where we're talking to young kids, and what's our emphasis when we're talking to children or kids in school? What do you want to do when you grow up? What do you want? When we talk about what you want to be, it's more of a title. It's what do you want to task? What accomplishments do you want to have? You start thinking about making what to do to make a living, as opposed to some of those inner qualities, right? Where we want to talk about the development of love, joy, patience, kindness, faithfulness. If you're keeping score, those are some of the fruits of the Holy Spirit, right? It doesn't seem to fit with our world of competitiveness, of sports and business. But yet, it's important to make a life by having those values inside you. But this takes intentionality. Think about it. Being takes presence and intentionality. Doing, you just get caught up in the motions of doing things. And good example, Joe Moglia. If you don't know his story, I would Google Joe Moglia, football coach. He was most recently the coach at Coastal Carolina. So when he took over the football program at Coastal Carolina, they were like Towson. That's the level they competed at. That's probably the amount of success they had. In a very short period of time, Coastal Carolina became Penn State, became Maryland. As of last month, they were actually ranked in the top 25 of what's considered the FBS as opposed to the FCS. And when he did this and rallied his team and created success, what's interesting is he had no team rules. He had one team principle. His team principle was be a man, be accountable, be responsible, show up, be present. He didn't care about the do part of team rules. Make sure you do this, make sure you don't do that. It was about the being, and guess what? When you focus on the being, the doing follows. Think about being healthy as opposed to doing a diet. If your approach to things is, I want to be a healthy person, well, the diet, the exercise, and all that follows. But the mindset is so much more. You might park at the end of the parking lot and walk further to the grocery store. You might take the stairs instead of the escalator. If your focus is just on doing, and you're worried about doing a diet, well, or doing exercise, you can't out-exercise a bad diet. And sometimes diets don't necessarily put the right combination of food in you. But if your approach is to be healthy, the doing follows. Be in love with your spouse. If you take the presence of being in love with your spouse as opposed to making sure you're doing all the right things, the hugs and saying I love you and that stuff, being in love with your spouse creates an appearance, creates a perception, creates awareness. The little inconsistencies or the imperfections, they aren't noticed because you're in love with your spouse. The doing follows. Be a person of God as opposed to just doing what, going to Mass, reading the Bible, praying. All those doing activities are good, but if you are a person of God, you will do those, but you will also approach life much better. The Holy Spirit will have a greater presence. And the being is authenticity. We all know people who do all the right things, but if you peel back the layers deep enough, they aren't necessarily the beings consistent with what they're doing. But the doing is always consistent with what the being. It's our being, not our doing, that will matter. Great, when you think about understanding love and tolerance, and those are big catchwords today. Tolerance is, and you can see it in the paper for probably the last dozen years. Tolerance is distinguishing, and love is distinguishing the ideas from the person, right? Love the person. You're not necessarily loving what they do and their actions. And I think the two greatest examples are Jesus. Jesus loved the Roman centurion. I don't think he was too thrilled with his acts of oppression. And Jesus loved the woman at the well, although her acts of infidelity probably weren't something he was willing to accept. Love the person. Separate the being from the doing. So we're going to start by practicing mindfulness, and then we're going to understand the difference between being and doing. The third piece, excuse me for a second, dry mouth. We're going to cherish the journey. Understanding where you are on your journey, what different points they are, cherishing and just relishing in where you are. So a good example is, for me, right now on my journey, a Friday night, sitting on a swing on a fall evening, it's where I want to be. That's the presence that I want to have. Not that long ago, that Friday night was in the booth on a football field, right? Listening to my adult daughters, understanding where my presence is on my journey right now. I've got adult daughters. What are their challenges? Listening to them, letting them share what's going on in their lives, different than what's going on with your homework. Or I had 3 daughters, so God forbid the drama in middle school. It's where you are today in that journey. I'm in my final third, I call it. So my presence in the workforce is a little bit different. 18 months ago, I started with the company I'm now with. The day I was hired, I was the newest employee. I was also the oldest employee. And when you have presence of that situation, it changes things. The role of being a mentor, the one with the most life experience to share, is probably as important, if not more so, than what you're doing in the tasks and the orientation that goes on in the workforce. And one of the challenges has been, how do you mentor over Zoom? If you don't have presence and you're not aware and being intentional, trying to mentor to people who are younger than you that you could share your wisdom with on a Zoom call is impossible. Carpe diem. So when I talk about cherishing the journey, carpe diem, right? Most people know that as seize the day. Right? Well, the original translation was, believe it or not, pluck the day, trusting as little as possible to the next one. So plucking, taking. Right? Life is short. There's that great philosopher, Jimmy Buffett, who said 24 hours or maybe 60 good years. It's really not that long a stay. Life is short. Cherish it. Appreciate it. Take advantage of the opportunities that are presented to you. If you're mindful and you're understanding what the intentionality is, you know the difference between being and doing, and you're cherishing the journey, that's all going to build to what I think is probably the most important piece of presence, and that's having an attitude of privilege. Albert Einstein once said, there are only two ways to live your life. One is though nothing is a miracle, and the other is if everything is. I believe we can substitute the word privilege for miracle, where there are only two ways to live your life. One is though nothing is a privilege, and the other is as if everything is. Presence is recognizing that what we get to do, who we get to do it with, where we are, is a privilege. We can go through life recognizing the privileges that we have. If we don't, we kind of just are going through it. We're not offering the right consideration. We're not enjoying the moments that are there. I think about from a standpoint of the presence, privilege, right? It's a privilege to be married, to have someone who supports you, who loves you, who's there for you, that you can reciprocate that with. It's a privilege to have a family, to be given the ability to raise and nurture them, and then later on in life have them nurture you. It's a privilege to have close friends that come and support you, that you can confide in. And it's a privilege to work, to make a difference in the world. We get to do things is the privilege perspective versus have to do things. I'm a big believer in it's get to, not have to. Get to is that privilege perspective. Have to is that it's an obligation. I have to do this. Sometimes you play the victimhood when that standpoint. And I like to look at it from a thing, I get to do the dishes. I'm excited and I get to do the dishes because somebody made a wonderful meal for me that I got to enjoy. I get to do yard work because I got a beautiful yard that I can relax in, find enjoyment. I get to do housework because I've got a home. Right? It's not I have to. Right? I had a boss once say, we serve from a privileged position. And I find that kind of interesting. It was the mindset of we get to have customers. We get to have those relationships. We get to earn their trust. No matter how crazy or inane their requests might be, we get to honor those. We don't have to, the customer's not always right. We have to do these things. If you look at it from a privileged position, it's much more engaging. It's much more rewarding. Customer service level goes through the roof. And when I think about the get to and the have to and the privilege that comes with it, a good friend of mine I played football with, I played left cornerback, he played right cornerback. Gentleman's name's John Byrne. John Byrne was married and had 3 daughters. There, but for the grace of God go I. Passed away from brain cancer at 38. So I had one of those situations where, remember I had 3 daughters, so you're talking middle school, high school. It was one of those evenings where it was, I hate you, slam the door in your face, never want to see you again in my life type of situation, which set you back as a parent, as a father. And reflecting upon it, at that moment, I had the presence to realize this was an opportunity I had that John Byrne didn't have. This was an opportunity that my daughters had to do that with their father that his daughters didn't. So looking at it from that perspective, it changes your view. You get to do things. It's a privilege to do things. It's not an obligation that you have to. So the 4 key elements of presence. Let's start with having mindfulness or intentionality. Let's understand the difference between being and doing. Let's cherish the journey. And let's have an attitude of privilege. So, how do we do that? How do we build that? What are the action steps? I'm going to share with you some of the ones that I've taken over the course of my experience of life that help to do that, to create presence. So first of all, align yourself with who you want to be, right? If you're a carpenter or in construction, you understand, you got to level things, you got to plumb things, you got to square things up. Right? Take the time to do that. Take the time to put toothpaste in the tube. Be where your feet are. Right? Don't settle for anything less. If you're at home, be present at home, present at the moment with your wife, with your kids. If you're at work, be present at work, the tasks that you're responsible for doing. If you're in church, be present at church. Don't daydream. Right? If you're driving, be present when you're driving. Don't text. Right? And if you're at a conversation, be present. Give it your full attention. My father used to make everybody he talked to think like they were the most important person in the world, because at that moment they were, because he was present in the conversation. He would absolutely go bonkers if he saw his grandkids these days with their cell phone in their hand, checking a text while having a conversation with somebody. Be present where you are. Be that guy. Right? So that's John McClane from Die Hard. So a little bit of an interjection. It is a Christmas movie, Die Hard, all right? Let's be clear on that. But I think it was Die Hard 3 or 4, where John McClane talked about the fact that he didn't like that he was always in these circumstances, that he always had to deal with these things. But he said, I'm that guy. I need to be that guy. Well, that could be as simple as you're in the shopping center parking lot, and there's a cart. Return the shopping cart. You're walking through a park, there's a piece of trash. Be the guy that just picks up that trash. But it can also be as significant as if you see a wrongdoing, say something, do something. I'm a Western PA guy, sports fan. Recently, a local high school was in the news, if some of you saw it or not. They had a female goalie on the high school hockey team. And the opposing team's male fans, high school age, were chanting a pretty derogatory chant that brought the girl to tears. And as I hear this story, I'm like, where was the adult? Where was somebody to step up and interject at that point, to have presence that this was wrong? You know, today, we see a lot of wrongdoings happening, and we see videos of them. And I always ask myself, why are you videotaping something that's not right instead of doing something about it? You know, it seems to be the videos overriding the voice piece of it. Be that guy. Step up. Take responsibility. Teddy Roosevelt, do what you can with what you have where you are. And my favorite character from the Old Testament is Nehemiah. Talk about presence to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem in 56 days, right? Distractions, people telling him to come down off the ladder. Stop what you're doing, it's never going to work. Nehemiah was focused, he had presence. He continued to remain where he was in the world by rebuilding those walls. Build eulogy virtues versus resume virtues. So if we focus on resume virtues, those are accomplishments, and usually in comparison with others. What have you done? If you build eulogy virtues or focus on eulogy virtues, you're going to get back to things like love, kindness. And for those of you who don't recognize, eulogy virtues are those things you want people to share about at your eulogy. And they're rarely going to talk about how many times you made Salesman of the Year. It's going to be how kind you were or what you did. Focus on eulogy virtues instead of resume. Stop idolizing the doing. We get caught up. Man, we got to continue to do this. Sometimes we do that so we don't want to slow down and reflect upon things. Slow down, right? Use words like cherish, savior, savor, meander, linger. You know, words that we rarely use, so therefore we seldom behave that way. And if you go back to thoughts leading to words and words eventually becoming destiny, if you start using words like that, it starts to influence your actions. You start to slow down. You start to gain an appreciation. You have presence in what's happening around you. And to help you do that, take the occasional what's called an awe walk, A-W-E, for those of you that my Pittsburgh accent's not coming through properly, right? Just go out, take a walk, and be in awe of what's going on. Be in awe of the sunset. Be in awe of the birds chirping in the background. Be in awe of God's beauty that He's provided. Put aside the concerns of the deadlines and the craziness. Turn your phone off. Have those electronic free times. Have a mindfulness scorecard, either in conjunction with or instead of a bucket list. Everybody knows what a bucket list is. Those things you want to do before you kick the bucket. Well, why don't we focus on also having a mindful scorecard? Those things you want to be and how you are reflected in those beings. Are you being kind? Are you being joyful? Are you sharing love? Right? St. Catherine of Siena says, be who you were meant to be and you will set the world on fire. Focus on the being. Finally, in terms of steps we could take, love others. Love the person. Right? Bible does not say tolerate thy neighbor or be civil with thy neighbor. The Bible says love thy neighbor. Right? Stop defining others based on what they do. We fall into that trap. Focus on the being. Presence to do that creates dignity in those around you. It's an openness, it's an acuteness of other surroundings. So there's a lot going on. We're on the hamster wheel. You know, we get the rat race. We get into what quite possibly is we're already in a zombie apocalypse as people walk around in kind of a fog and just worry going from one thing to the next, right? Let's have that divergent thinking. Let's be mindful. Let's pay attention. As my father's favorite scripture, Psalms 118:24. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice in it and be glad. Be in the moment. Seize the opportunity. So have mindfulness or intentionality. Understand being versus doing. Cherish the journey. And have an attitude of privilege. Those 4 things will support having presence and can impact you. So I thank you for your time and your presence. Both are appreciated. And I trust, not hope, right, that I didn't bother you or bore you. And maybe you leave here with one nugget to apply. Maybe there's some paint in the can that you can walk away with. So thank you again. If you like what you heard, right, I do blog. The thing has it. Like I said, 4 years, 160 blogs. Pretty much everything I share tonight is somewhere in one of those blogs. I continue to be inspired to write more in different ones. I can just say rejoice and Godspeed. And thank you for your presence. You like the Jimmy Buffett reference? Presence, intentionality. I find little nuggets in song lyrics, quotes. There's so much that's been created by other people. If you take time and you just read it and process it and think about it, it can help to make a joy. Most of my blogs will come from a line that I hear, a song line. One of the things that fits this is Paul Simon's 59th Street Bridge song. Most of you guys know it as Feeling Groovy. Right? That song came to him as he was leaving Manhattan, walking across the 59th Street Bridge to Queens. And the rush hour traffic was coming across the bridge going into Manhattan. So he's leaving Manhattan while rush hour is going into Manhattan. So you know the type of evening that Paul Simon had. And it was like, slow down, you move too fast as the cars were whizzing by him. You got to make the morning last. And Queens had cobblestones. Kick it down to cobblestones, looking at life and feeling groovy. That was a moment of presence that hit him there, and he wrote a hit song off of it. Side note, he hates that song today. He says it's too sappy. But it was influential of where he was in the moment. So there are song lyrics, there are quotes that can always capture what we're feeling. Well, thank you. Appreciate it. I'm done.